I did. Okay.
Recording in progress.
So I don't have to remind you all, we are being recorded. Okay. Our president, who is Paula Bernstein, is going to be our reader. Paula is a mother. She's a wife, a surgeon, and an OB-GYN. She started off to be a chemist, but she decided she liked people better than test tubes. When she retired from her practice, she's not one to sit still. She became a successful mystery writer of the Hannah Klein Mysteries. And with all that, she's also our president, as I mentioned earlier. Today, Paula is going to read from her latest Hannah Klein novel, Murder is a Hate Crime. So take it away, Paula.
Hey, Bobby. Just to put everything in context, I'd like to tell you all just a little bit about my series before I start reading. My series is called the Hannah Klein series. This is Hannah, and she is an OB-GYN practicing at a private hospital in Los Angeles. You know how they say, write what you know. And when you meet her in the first novel, she's a young widow with a precocious 4-year-old daughter. And in the first book, her beloved sister-in-law is murdered. And she meets Detective Daniel Ross of the LAPD, who's in charge of the investigation. And the two of them begin a romantic relationship that we follow through all the subsequent books. In addition to Hannah, I have a number of ancillary characters who appear in most of the books. And after I wrote the 6th novel, I decided it would be fun to focus a little bit on some of my other characters and investigate their backstories and tell my readers a little bit about their lives. So the 7th novel was about Hannah's best friend, who was a psychiatrist, and it was a psychiatric thriller. And Murder is a Hate Crime is about Detective Brenda Jordan. And Brenda is Daniel's partner in crime, as it were. And she is going to be pretty much on her own in this novel because Daniel and Hannah are taking some family time. So I'm going to begin here with the first chapter. Detective Brenda Jordan's cell phone rang at 5:45 a.m. Her girlfriend, Marcy, groaned, rolled over, and put a pillow on her head. Jordan here, hold on, Brenda said. She tiptoed out of bed and took the phone into the bathroom so she could talk without further disturbing Marcy, who was not a morning person. Brenda was not supposed to be on call until 7 a.m. What's going on? Dead body, probable homicide at Pico and Sepulveda under the freeway, the dispatcher said. Detective Rodriguez has his hands full with a home invasion in Bel Air and asked if you'd take it. Brenda rolled her eyes. No detective liked to catch a murder case an hour before going off duty, but Rodriguez was a good guy and rarely took advantage of his fellow detectives. If he'd said he was tied up, it was probably the truth. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Brenda said. She'd taken the precaution of leaving her morning clothes in the bathroom the previous night so she wouldn't wake Marcy when she dressed. Marcy worked for a Santa Monica architectural firm, and her workday began at 9. Pulling on pants, a turtleneck, and a jacket, Brenda washed her face, brushed her teeth, and ran a comb through her blonde bob. As she left the bathroom and closed the bedroom door behind her, she noticed that Marcy had fallen asleep again. Removing her gun and shoulder holster from the safe in her hall closet, Brenda grabbed her keys and headed for her car. It wouldn't take more than 10 minutes to drive from her Culver City apartment to the homeless camp. When she arrived, she was pleased to see that the officers who found the body had already installed crime scene tape and were keeping onlookers away. She didn't recognize either of the patrolmen and assumed they were among the new batch of cadets who'd recently graduated. She exited her car and pulled out her badge. Detective Brenda Jordan, what's the story? The tall, round-faced cop with neatly cut black hair introduced himself. Alberto Figueroa, ma'am. We found the homeless camp deserted except for one dead body. His head is bloody, so I'm assuming homicide. Brenda pulled on a pair of paper shoe covers and latex gloves and slipped under the tape. Have you called the evidence team and the coroner yet? She asked. No, ma'am. Brenda wasn't quite used to ma'am. It made her feel elderly. But compared to those two 22-year-olds, 35 was probably ancient. Go ahead and call them. I'm going to take a look. She glanced around the homeless encampment. Where is everyone? They probably cleared out to avoid talking to the police. They'll be back tonight. It's supposed to rain again, Brenda said. She swept the ground with her flashlight, walking carefully so as not to step on anything that looked as if it could be evidence. The victim appeared to be a middle-aged Black man. Curly hair with a receding hairline was slicked back with gel. He had a full beard, which was well-groomed, and she could see clotted blood on the pavement under his head. Grasping the blanket with two gloved fingers, she folded it back to inspect his clothes and to search for a wallet. He was wearing jeans and a worn black leather jacket. The pockets she could reach were empty. Brenda unzipped the jacket, revealing a white t-shirt. There was no sign of blood. He hadn't been stabbed or shot, at least not from the front. She'd wait until the medical examiner arrived and turned him over to check his back. Wondering if he'd been beaten, she raised the t-shirt looking for bruising. What she found instead were two flattened breasts. Brenda quickly replaced the jacket and blanket, not wanting to interfere with the body's temperature. This may be a hate crime, she announced. This guy is trans.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Do you have anything else to add since you're the president?
No, I have nothing else to add. Why don't we go on to our terrific speaker?
Okay, Wanda, find you. I'm so glad that you are with us today, and you and Lori. So we're going to have two speakers, but first we're going to have our wonderful speaker, Wanda Morris, Wanda M. Morris. Wanda, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Wanda is a corporate attorney, and she's worked for in the legal department of several Fortune 100 companies. She's the president of Georgia's chapter of the Association of the Corporate Counselor, and she's the founder of a women's initiative, an empowerment group for female in-house lawyers. She belongs to Sisters in Crime. She's also a member of the the Crime Mystery Writers of Color. She's a wife and a mother of three. And her first book, which is really very successful, is All Her Little Lies. She's been giving grand reviews, including being compared to a John Grinson book of The Client. And yet with all of that and so much success, it's been very successful. She couldn't get published. And that's why the title of her book is An Overnight Success that only took 13 years. And when Wanda's finished, she's going to share with her presentation. She's going to turn it over to her agent, Lori Galvin. Lori is a former editor, and so she's very editorial in working with her clients, and is a passionate advocate for all voices. She's going to tell us what she saw in Wanda that all the other agents missed. So welcome, Wanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bobby. Thank you, Paula, for inviting me. I have to also give a special shout out to Pamela Samuels Young. She and I go way, way back. She's also a lawyer, and funny story how I met Pamela. We were both at a legal conference. I had heard of her books, but had never met her. And I spotted her across the aisle from me. And during a break, I went over and slipped her a note and said, I'll buy you lunch if you talk to me about writing mysteries. And she took me up on her offer, and we've been friends ever since. So thank you as well, Pamela. So yeah, my overnight success only took 13 years. I don't have a formal script because so much of my story is so personal. You know, I just like anybody else, and going to work every day, and doing my job, raising kids, trying to be a good wife, daughter, sister, and all those things. But ever since I was a young girl, I've always loved to write. And as I was getting ready to go off to college, I'm the youngest of 7 kids, I was encouraged to get a real job, so to speak, whatever that means. So I happily skipped off to college, not thinking I ever be a writer, despite the fact of loving writing. But went off to college and then law school. I've always journaled, so I was always writing in some context, but nothing on the order of, something in long form. So flash forward to, oh gosh, 2008, I believe it was. I had this character, Elise Littlejohn, rambling around my head for a couple years before that. I thought, gosh, it would be so interesting to read a story about, a complicated Black female. Behind me are shelves with oodles of books by, John Grisham and Harlan Coben, writers who I admire, but writers who did not center Black females in their books. So I, finally put pen to paper in 2008, and I started writing this book. Now, I didn't finish it in 2008. I probably got about 60 or 70% through the book. I had some of the same main characters that are in the book now, way back then. But as I was writing, I did something that I tell everybody, don't use my example. I put the book away. I had convinced myself that it wasn't very good, and that, somebody buying a book about a middle-aged Black female protagonist who worked with really awful people, well, that would never sell. So I put the book away for probably about 7 years. And in 2015, I had gone through some health challenges, and I got through them. But in the course of doing that, I decided that I needed more peace and joy in my life. I needed to get rid of some of the stress, because it too had an impact on my health. So I have always enjoyed writing. I've always loved writing. So I picked that manuscript back up, and I read it this time, and it was still awful. But I figured that was okay, because I could make something that was bad better. So I went about working on it again. And this time I realized, as I was working on it, the reason why the book was so bad is that I didn't know what I was doing. I had the story in my head, but I didn't know how to translate what was in my head onto paper to make it engaging for a reader. And so I decided I need to learn how to write a book, not just sit down and write these scenes that kind of didn't go anywhere and didn't really tell the story I was trying to tell. So I started taking courses, like wherever I could find them. The first course I remember taking was right down the road here in Atlanta at Emory University, and they had evening courses, kind of like adult learning, I think, but they had some in creative writing. And so I would hustle home from work and get my kids fed and settled and all that stuff. And then I would run out and take this course for an hour. I think it was an hour and a half. every Wednesday. I'll never forget. And I thought, okay, I get now what I am lacking in this book. And so that was just the start of it. Wherever I found an online course or something that I thought would help me as I poured back into this manuscript, I tapped into it. In 2016, I believe it was, I had gone through the manuscript. I had finally gotten to the end of the book. I'd written the end and thought, yeah, this looks great. I'm going to see if I can get an agent now. And so I happily skipped off and drafted all these query letters and sent them off. And they, of course, I was roundly rejected. And some of them were just form letters. And some people said, I just don't get the character, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, okay, the rejection stung. I don't have to tell you guys that. The rejection hurt, but I tried to get past that. If there were constructive critiques about the manuscript in the agent letter, I tried to use that. If it wasn't, I tried to kind of put it aside. And then I decided I had this full manuscript. I was in love with these characters by now because I'd been working on it and refining them and their characterization. So I applied to the Yale Writers Workshop in New Haven and using a portion of my manuscript for the application process. And wonder of wonders, I got in and I thought, yeah, this is great. And it was great. I learned so much because the Yale Writers Workshop wasn't just focused on writing specifically in the mystery genre. They had, literary, they had poetry, they had memoir. And so I interacted with all these different people and I got to learn what made their books stronger and was there something in their books that I could use in my book. And so it was a really great experience. Went back home, revised the manuscript tremendously based on that. And thought, yeah, now I'm ready to get an agent. This is going to be great. And started querying again. And that round of queries wound up in a lot of rejection because I kind of went wide that time. I thought, this book is so good. Surely I'm getting an agent, and they all rejected me again. And I thought, okay. And that round of rejections really kind of stung, because I thought I had found the voice in the book, and that was not to be. So anyway, I kind of licked my wounds from that and said, again, when I get the rejection letters, the initial feeling is, ouch. I tried to step back from that to kind of get my footing again. And then I would go back to them and kind of parse through and see if there was anything that I could use from the rejection letter. So I did that again in 2016. So by 2017, I was revising again. And this time I'd had so much rejection. And, I don't have to tell you guys this, but family is wonderful, but they don't really understand what it's like to get rejected on something that, you've poured your heart into and all this effort. And, my husband, and he is such a trooper, and he's like, oh, you're going to get there. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great. And it's just like, no, it's not. You feel like you're in the pits. But what I did, and now as I look back on it, it was really smart. I started to try and find kind of my village. I tried to find support within the writing community. And that's when I joined organizations like Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America. I found Crime Writers of Color because I was so enamored with a young author, and they'd done a feature on her, I think in like Writer's Digest or something, Writer's Magazine or something. And I kind of slipped into her DMs and I told her, I read the article and I've read your book and I just think it was wonderful. And I just want to let you know, I write in the mystery genre. And it was so refreshing to see another Black female. And she responded back and she said, oh my gosh, you write mysteries too? You need to join this organization that I'm in called Crime Writers of Color. And she kind of took me under her wing. Her name is Kelly Garrett. And I'm forever in debt to her because that group, again, was such a support, because when I got these rejections, I could talk to other people who were kind of like, oh yeah, it's going to be okay. Or they could direct me to agents they thought might be interested in my type of book, et cetera. And so I always tell people, if, I'm giving advice, kind of find your support. Family and friends are great, but if you can find other writers who can support you, that's even better. So we're now at 2017. I've got this manuscript. I've got, all this knowledge I've gained from this workshop and some of these online courses. Now, keep in mind two things that I failed to mention. One, I've been writing this book in secret. So nobody knows I'm writing this book. I didn't tell my husband I was writing the book until 2016, right before I went off to Yale Writers Workshop, because I was going to be gone for 2 weeks and he would have to take care of our son. So I finally had to fess up and tell him, I got into this writer's workshop. And he's like, why are you going to a writer's workshop? And I was like, well, I wrote a book. He's like, you wrote a book? I was like, yeah. So he was very supportive. I swore him to secrecy. And I didn't tell the rest of my family that I was writing this book. So I'm writing, totally in secret, except for the people like in my kind of village, my writing community village. The other thing is I'm writing this book while I'm working a full-time job, of course, but I'm working a job where I manage a team of attorneys that reside and work on the West Coast. So I was flying out to California at least once or twice a month. And, I have people now that say, how in the world did you find time to write? And I'm like, I'm always so grateful for those times that I had to fly out to California, because I was writing in airports, I was writing in airplanes, I was writing outside my kid's school while I was waiting on, him to wrap up track or piano lessons for my daughter, whatever it was. Wherever I could find a free moment, I snatched that time and I used it to write. So by the end of 2017, I was certain I'm going to get an agent this time. I now have, my supporters who are saying, oh yeah, you ought to check with this agent. You ought to query this agent because she represented so-and-so, and that book sounds like your book. And I had all this advice and I'm like, now I'm going to get an agent. Now we're here. End of 2017, I sent out another round of queries and I got rejected by everybody again. And it was like, yikes. And I think for a moment, I contemplated whether this was the book. Maybe this was not the book. But I'm kind of hard-headed, y'all. So I kept at it. And by the time 2018 rolled around, I had some other stuff going on. My role was changing at work, and it was just like a lot of life stuff going on. But I had heard about this contest, which unfortunately has since been discontinued, called Pitch Wars. And it was an online mentoring program where if you get in, you're paired up with a published author. And so for 3 months, you work with this author. They kind of read through and give you tips and help you revise your manuscript to get it into a position where at the end of the 3 months, you go before an agent showcase. So you put up your first page of your manuscript. Agents would come in, they would register, they come in, if they read the first page, they liked it, and they say, hey, love this, send me the rest of the manuscript. And so I applied to get into Pitch Wars, and yay, I got into Pitch Wars. And I worked with a lovely author by the name of Wendy Hurd. And, she gave me some wonderful and valuable information on, how I could beef up my manuscript. At the end of the 3 months, I went into the agent showcase. And I'm telling y'all, I had over 20 agents who said, whoa, I love this premise. Don't clap yet, because all those agents rejected me. I had over 20 agents that said they love the premise, they love the first page, and they all turned me down. And I was like, man, what in the world is going on? And so I really needed like some big time to kind of nurse those wounds, because then I was kind of hurting, because I was like, they like the first page, but obviously there's something going on in the book that it's not speaking to readers. And so what I did is I took all those rejection letters. There were some that were just kind of form letters, so I couldn't do anything with those. But there was a core sample of probably, I don't know, maybe about 7 or 8 of those rejection letters where the agent actually gave me some information. I'm a Virgo, y'all, so I'm into spreadsheets and charts and stuff like that. I took those core letters and I put their comments in a sort of chart to kind of map what were they seeing, what were they not seeing. And what it came down to, and what a lot of the other letters had come down to, is that they could not understand how my protagonist could behave the way she behaved. And so the thought was, it kind of doesn't ring true. It doesn't make sense why she do these things. And so I was trying to capture her backstory in flashbacks, and it wasn't working. And I remember one of those courses that I'd taken a long time ago, years and years ago. One of the workshop leaders had said, don't ever write your story or your book in dual timelines, because people will love one timeline and hate the other. And I had been doing this. I had been following this advice. Well, after I got those rejection letters and I put this chart together, and I said, okay, there's something that is not landing about Elise Littlejohn's character. And the flashbacks obviously aren't getting it. I'm getting rejected anyway, so I might as well just open up the story and do it in dual timelines so that you could see what actually happened when she was a 14-year-old girl that would inform and impact her as a working adult. And so I rewrote the entire book, putting in these dual timelines. And of course, I had gotten all this rejection, but I had also signed up for a conference called Thriller Fest. We are in 2019 now. I had signed up for this conference called Thriller Fest, and part of Thriller Fest, you get to pitch to agents. And I was still kind of nursing my wounds, still trying to revise this book. And I was like, I don't even want to go to Thriller Fest. And I certainly don't want to pitch to agents, but, I kind of put on my big girl panties and I was like, I've already paid for it. I got to do it. So I kind of went through the brochure, and it, gives you kind of the bios of all the different agents that you can pitch to. Well, keep in mind, I think I darn near run out of agents to pitch to that represented in this genre. But I knew that my book had some elements of women's fiction in it. And so I went through the bios and I narrowed it down to a couple of agents. And Lori Galvin was one of them. So I get to the pitch fest, and the way it's set up, they have tables in this room, different tables, and the agents are sitting there. You kind of wait in line for your turn, and then you go up and you pitch your book. So I'm waiting in line, and I'm at Lori's table because I looked at the two agents. One agent, her line was really long. And so I looked at Lori's line, and her line was really long too, but her line wasn't as long as the other. So I was like, okay, I'll wait in this line. So they were both long lines. So I'm waiting there, and I see the young lady that is in line in front of me, and she's kind of wrapping up with Lori, and they're, saying their little goodbyes. And I get super, super nervous all of a sudden. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. So I sit down at the table in front of Lori, and Lori says, hi, so tell me about your book. And I was like, okay. And I was so nervous, I decided that I would just pretend like Lori was like a girlfriend I was having lunch with. And I was going to tell her this story about this other woman I knew who just worked with these god-awful people and had gone through some stuff. And so I kept that in mind, and that is the way I gave my pitch. And when I finished, Lori said, ooh, that sounds good. Send me the full manuscript. And I thought, oh my gosh, she wants the full manuscript. She doesn't even want 10 pages. And I was like, oh, of course. And I take her business card. And I was so excited, I skipped out of the pitch fest and forgot about the other agent totally. So I never even pitched to the other agent. So Lori was the only agent I pitched to. I sent Lori the manuscript. And at the time, the working title for the book was The Elephant Fighter. I sent her The Elephant Fighter, and 24 hours later, Lori emailed me back and said, I am loving The Elephant Fighter. And I literally welled up. I just could not even believe my good fortune. So I tell you all of that story in all the gory detail to share that, there's something about this industry. I mean, you got to get calluses, you got to get dogged. And I just couldn't let this book go. And I am so glad that I didn't. But it is a tough business. And, back in 2008, first, I never imagined that I'd be published. By 2015, when I thought, yeah, maybe I could get published, I never thought it would be this sort of ride where it was rejection after rejection after rejection. And then finally, there's that one person who sees some spark or something in your manuscript, and you're on your way. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Lori, because I can't tell you what Lori saw in the manuscript. Only she can tell you that. But whatever she saw, I am grateful.
Thanks, Wanda. And thank you, Bobby and Paula, for having me. First, I'd like to clarify, Wanda, if you had gone to other agents at that, you would have had a whole bunch of offers. I really think it's about timing. That's so important. And your manuscript was like at that place. Mm-hmm. If agents get involved with the manuscript too early, it's not going to help anybody. And it's, it can be disastrous. Okay. So I remember this particular Thriller Fest so clearly. I was leaving to go on a weekend with like my mother and my sister and my aunt and my cousin like the next day. And I was just a little bit stressed out that this family event had been scheduled right after Thriller Fest. So anyway, I came in and I really love doing Thriller Fest because I love seeing faces. So many times when people pitch me, it's over email. So I was excited to be there, and I had the long line of people, and I think you only have like 3 minutes, or it might
Yeah.
only be 3 minutes. So it's kind of crazy. Anyway, Wanda came up to me and she was just so warm and enthusiastic. And when she gave me the initial pitch, and I actually have her pitch letter that she sent me when she sent me the manuscript, and it repeated the pitch. So I'll just read that. She said, "I'm seeking representation for my own voice's psychological thriller, The Elephant Fighter, complete at 95,000 words. Comparatively speaking, it packs the narrative dexterity of Chandler Baker's The Whisper Network with the twisty plotting of How to Get Away with Murder." And I was just like, yes, please, when I heard that. And then the more she told me about it, I was like, yeah, this sounds really good. And I asked to see the full, and honestly, I asked to see the full because I don't always ask to see the full, and I just had this feeling. I've had that feeling before, and it hasn't worked out, but Wanda sent it to me, and I fell in love with the book. That's pure and simple. The voice just drew me in so completely. I loved the dual timelines. They were just so masterful and so different yet complemented each other. The first page, I remember being like, oh, like stopping reading and just being like, whoa, this is really good. She really evoked this town, this rural town, so evocatively. It was so uncanny. And the characters, it's very hard to develop characters that resonate emotionally. And Wanda just does that so well. This book, it grabbed, my head and my heart. And I think that, that it just shows what a great writer she is. That is, loving the manuscript is part of the, what you need to want to work with somebody. The other part is, who is this person? And we had a 3-minute exchange that I really enjoyed. What's it going to be like for us to work together? Because, sometimes you just don't mesh. But we had a wonderful conversation. I was astounded at how much work and how well Wanda knew the market. I just admired, that she was involved in all of these organizations, and it just said to me, this person is serious. And we had, really in-depth conversations about some of the characters. I remember talking to her about the character of Vera, and I just knew she knows these characters like the back of her hand. I've got to work with this person. I was so won over. I was so impressed with Wanda as a writer and as somebody who was constantly trying to improve her craft. Because this is a business of rejection, and everybody gets rejected. Agents get rejected, and it's you really have to have fortitude. And I could tell that that Wanda had that. earlier this week, I was talking a little bit with Wanda about today and how I said, maybe not so jokingly, I said, one thing that I really appreciate about Wanda is that, she is a grown up, and sometimes she would actually remind me of that fact. And I guess what I'm saying is she's got emotional intelligence, and it's something we all aspire to, but it's a business. It's difficult. Writing is very personal and very emotional, and you can't always take things personally. And Wanda was able to separate herself from those things. And when we sent out our manuscript, some people, yes, we had an auction a couple of weeks later, which was absolutely amazing. But it wasn't like everybody, but it wasn't the end of the world. And Wanda was able to recognize that and just, roll through things. And I appreciate that so much. And, I remember that first conversation and I was just like, oh, I really want to work with her. I hope this works out. And I remember reading the manuscript when I was on my family trip, and don't talk to me, I'm reading this manuscript. What's it about? Oh, that sounds really good. So yeah, I mean, that's really it in a nutshell. I really think that, for me, Wanda had like everything that I was looking for. The manuscript ticked all the boxes. I felt like, yes, I can add something to this. Sometimes I'll read a manuscript and, I'll really like it. But I, may not know how to get it to the next level, and or how to have the conversation to get it to the next level. And it just means I'm not the right agent for that project. And I just felt like I was. So anyway, I'm really glad that Wanda decided to work with me, and we've just been, I think when right after you signed the agency agreement, I said, oh, we're going to have so much fun. And we have.
Yes, you did. You did say that. One of the things that Lori is being very modest about is her editorial involvement. And she, I distinctly remember this, Lori. I don't know if you remember this, but once I signed up with you and you said, okay, I'll provide some notes and then, we'll kind of go from there. And I was like, yay. And I think it was like a couple weeks later, you sent me your notes, and, we had a call, or maybe it was before the call. No, I think it was before the call. It was when you signed me up and you were like, yeah, I have some notes. And here's the thing. I love this book. I love, love, love this book. But I think you need to make the ending fresher. And I was like, what? But she was right. Lori was right. She said, I think the ending has been done quite a bit. And I think you can dig deeper and find a fresher approach to this story. And that, among all the other advice Lori has given me, has been one of the best pieces of advice, because in doing that, she did make me dig deeper into the story. And she made me go to some places that I hadn't planned on going in this story. And I'm grateful, because those are the things about this novel that resonate for people, that when people reach out to me or I do book clubs, they're like, oh my gosh, when you were describing some of the experiences in the office, I've had those same experiences. Or, I've been that kind of person where I was very closed about, some painful, dark secret or whatever. Now, of course, this is all fiction, y'all. So, like, I haven't run up on any dead bodies that I walked away from without calling the authorities. But my point is simply that, because Lori said, hey, take a fresher approach, I was able to make the story that much more engaging. And she is, you know, she is astounding. She's got this editorial eye. Like, I'll I'll tell Lori, well, what if I did X, Y, and Z? And she always tells me, well, I'll have to see it in execution. But and I'm like, just tell me. But she doesn't. She doesn't tell me, I think you should write it this way. What she says is, I think that this story could be X, Y, and Z. So why don't you take a look at this or that? And I admire that because that tells me that she trusts me as a writer, that she, says, you go get the job done. She doesn't have to micromanage me. And so we can talk about, an idea, a characterization or something, and she trusts me enough to go and do it. And I'm grateful to you for that too. It makes for a really good agent author experience. But you have to know, what you need. Some people need an agent who is completely hands off, or some people need an agent who is more of a micromanager. I think, Lori and I have found kind of that sweet spot in between where, we kind of talk about ideas and, characters. And then, she kind of gives me the freedom to go off and do it and doesn't try and tell me how to write my books.
So you guys, what you have is trust in each other, and that really goes a long way. You trust what she suggests, and she trusts you for what you're gonna do with it. I'm gonna cut you because we want some questions and answer time. So if anybody has any questions for either one of them. Well, I have a question for you, Wanda. When you took all these courses, what did you learn about your character or what you were doing? Because sometimes I'll go and I'll take these courses, but I don't come back with any better idea of what I'm doing. In other words, I don't see their suggestions helping me in any way. So I'm always interested when people say they take courses and it helped them tremendously. Because once you're set with your characters, it's kind of hard to change them.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you kind of have to know what your weak spots are. So I was selective in the courses that I took. So for me, the thing that I won't say it's easy for me, but the thing that I'm probably a little more adept at is dialogue. Um, you know, I I like writing dialogue. I don't have characters talk to me, but in my head, I hear characters talking to each other. So I didn't take a lot of courses in dialogue. Characterization, however, is another thing. In my early queries, agents told me, the characterization is lacking. This character doesn't seem to be very dynamic. And so I remember distinctly in those early days taking a couple of courses on how to build great characters. And so for me, I went into it knowing that that is kind of where my weak spot was, and I needed to beef that up. And the other thing is that I trust other people to help me. I have a couple beta readers, and they don't write. They just like to read good books. They know like what a good book is. And so I usually run things by them and they can kind of tell me. And so I had a beta reader early on, and she was like, the narrative just falls flat. You just tell people, she stood here, he walked there, she looked here, he looked there. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I knew kind of what my weak spots were, and I tried to be selective